Welcome to SmartShare Housing Solutions, where we have been working to connect people and homes since 2017. One of the ways we do that is through the ADU SLOW program. Started in 2019, ADU SLOW was created to assist property owners on the logistics of adding housing units, utilizing backyards, garages, infill lots, and existing buildings that already have infrastructure and an embedded energy grid. SmartShare supports opportunities for safe and affordable housing through accessory dwelling units and tiny homes on wheels in San Luis Obispo County backyards. This video is from a workshop for City of San Luis Obispo residents and others interested in regulations in San Luis Obispo regarding ADUs and tiny homes on wheels. It was presented by SmartShare's Executive Director, Ann Wyatt, and San Luis Obispo's Housing Coordinator, David Amini, on May 21st, 2025.
I want to be clear up front. We set this up to share codes and allowances in the city of San Luis Obispo. So some of the codes and allowances will be a little different in your jurisdictions, whether that's the county jurisdiction or one of the other 6 cities in the county. SmartShare Housing is a nonprofit housing agency serving the county of San Luis Obispo, and we've been putting on these how-to workshops under our ADU SLOW program for the last couple of years now to help homeowners understand how they can produce low-cost affordable housing. And SmartShare operates 3 programs: ADU SLOW, which is helping with accessory dwelling units and tiny houses on wheels; our flagship program, HomeShare SLOW, which helps facilitate matches between people looking for rooms and people with extra bedrooms; and our third program, Co-Living Collaborative, is developing the Waterman Village at 466 Dana Street, just a jump behind us here. And so are people familiar with our Waterman Village development? Could you just raise your hand if you're not? Just to get a sense of that. Okay, well then I'm going to take this opportunity very quickly to have Mavis hold up our Waterman poster. Vicki is holding the front elevation of the Waterman Village proposed for Dana Street near here, and we're working on building 20 small homes around a rehabilitated historic adobe. And so that's next to the Oddfellows Hall, for anyone not quite sure where that site is. And Mavis has the site plan then with 20 homes around the adobe. There'll be micro cottages at a size of roughly 226 square feet. There'll be very small permanent houses, all affordable. So we're excited to be developing that project. It is entitled after 5 years in process. I know we have some generous donors here, so thank you very much, those of you who've already participated in that. We're really excited next steps to get to building permit and hopefully being able to start build next year if we can raise a few million more dollars. So I hope you'll ask us about that maybe in the break. That wasn't the point of today, but I couldn't resist. So the broader picture of why we're here today and why SmartShare and every other affordable housing agency in the county has an endless supply of work to do is largely a result of changing demographics. And I know it kind of puts most people to sleep. They don't get excited about the word demographics like me. But what we're seeing are a couple profound changes in society. And people realize some of them, but others I don't think people realize at all. And so it's really important to just bring up as we introduce the topic of ADUs specifically. What we're seeing is a lot more of a couple of things. We're seeing a lot more non-family households and single-person households and senior households. And so everybody knows we have an increasing number of seniors, and a lot of us are hitting that age, not that anyone here would identify. But so along with that, we're seeing a profound sort of subset in these. We're seeing a huge and increasing number of single senior women. And so we're looking between, depending on the community you live in, somewhere between 8 1 out of 8 or 1 out of 12 households is a single senior woman. And a lot of these women, us, are trying to make it on an average Social Security income of about $1,400 a month. And so nobody needs any math skills to know that creates a real challenge in a community where a studio apartment is now upwards of $2,000 a month. And so we're seeing an increasing number of elder adults struggling and unsheltered. It's the largest increase in our unsheltered, unhoused. They may be sheltered at the homeless shelter, but population. So what we see is a huge potential in small housing and ADUs to help this growing population who maybe doesn't need the old style traditional single family larger home of the old style traditional family. So that's kind of the setting that we're in here today. With that, we want to look at why build or purchase one of these things and what is an ADU. Steps for getting started. We'll look at design, both for pre-reviewed plans and other designs. What is allowed in the permitting. David's going to tell us about that specifically for the city of SLO. Cost and financing, construction, and rental management. So I'll speak briefly about all of these items. And so why build one? First of all, it's kind of important to think, I suspect these are the things that have drawn you here today: housing flexibility and choice and options. Like we talked about, more single people, single elder adults who may not need big house, may not want big house, may not be able to afford big house. Family flexibility, a bunch of people would like to live with family members. Certainly talked to some of those today. Whether that's bringing in an elder adult parent or housing younger children. Ability to age in place, some options for how to stay at home and not have to move somewhere with age. Really strengthens communities so people can stay in the communities they know and love with the people that support and love them. More affordable. These smaller homes are going to be more affordable than some other options. And it's a way for some people, the savvy and lucky, to build wealth and extra income. If it's done right, there can be some cash flow and some added equity over time. And a sustainable option using existing resources. We can do a lot more if we tap into our existing driveways and our existing sewer and water systems and add density near libraries and all that. And so in the public interest, beyond that of homeowners, we really want to provide housing options for an aging population. We see this coming over time, this really vast increase of elder adults in our communities that we need to get ready for. And we have mandates from the state to meet affordable housing targets. And so it's important that we do that. Beyond the moral imperative, there's a political necessity. And again, efficient use of existing infrastructure is a good thing for us all, costs less and uses what we've got. So with that, what are these things? Accessory dwelling unit, ADU. So these are accessory to an existing or a primary house. They could be planned and put in along with a new primary house. But basically, if you're here with a lot somewhere and no house on it, nothing we're going to tell you today applies to you. So if you're looking to develop some kind of cluster project or co-living that's not along with an existing house, don't think any of this is relevant. We can talk more, there are plenty of opportunities, but not under these ADU, accessory dwelling unit laws. So we can have attached homes, attached dwellings. So you see the little one sharing a wall. We can have detached where there are no shared walls, attic or basement conversions, garage, new unit above, or some kind of remodel or expansion. These things can take a lot of forms. There's a lot of flexibility in them. And so within our discussion of accessory dwelling units, we have 3 types we're going to talk about today here. And we could add a few more types, but these are the basic ones. And so there's an ADU, accessory dwelling unit, and then we'll talk about the California state law designated junior accessory dwelling unit, the JADU. And then we're going to talk about the tiny house on wheels, acronym THROW, that's allowed here in the city of San Luis Obispo and in the city of Arroyo Grande. They aren't allowed at this point in any other jurisdictions. So those of you who don't live in Slow City or Arroyo Grande, the conversations about tiny house wheels options won't be available to you. I hope you'll work with us to make those legal everywhere. We still have some work ahead. And so California law now allows 4 homes, basically, per residential parcel. So what we have traditionally called a single family lot or neighborhood really is now a, a 4-family lot neighborhood. So we're going to go through it, but basically state law allows the primary home that's there that we know, the single family place, and it allows an attached ADU out of existing space, a detached ADU, and a JADU. So that could be up to 4 different living quarters. And this is just really a brand new state law interpretation as of a Housing and Community Development Handbook that came out in January. So this isn't incorporated yet in the City of San Luis Obispo's municipal code or any city's municipal code that I know of, because it's just a brand new interpretation. And it's pretty exciting for some of us. The county is actually incorporating a more permissible code, if the supervisors pass it soon, that would allow 4 units of any type, not just these specific types. So for county people, assuming they approve this soon, you'll actually have even more flexibility to build separate units. And so it's really moving as different jurisdictions incorporate this and figure out how to work with it. But it's an exciting time and really changing by the day for us in this field. So really neat. So I hope you'll ask some questions about that. Yeah, no vacation rentals on any of these. This ADU law has been put in place by the state and mandated for jurisdictions in order to create housing, not more vacation rentals. So if you create any of these units under this streamlined law, you can't do less than 30-day rentals. And ask me later if you'd like about midterm rentals versus long-term rentals, because there's a lot of opportunity in the 1 month to 6 month range that's kind of new and changing. We're seeing a lot of our clients wanting to go the mid-range rental. So it could get a little into the weeds, but if somebody will ask me about that later, I think that could be really helpful for you all to understand options there. Behind you.
So you're saying there's 4 homes allowed per parcel, right? What's the minimum parcel size?
David, take notes. Basically, let me try this and correct me if I'm wrong. The state mandates these can go on any parcel as long as you keep some basic setbacks, which we'll talk about. So rough, quick answer is there a minimum parcel size? No.
Whatever fits.
If you can fit these things with some setbacks, you can do it. So this is exciting, and we're going to see some very interesting proposals coming out of this real quick. I think David's already seeing them, so he can tell us about that. I'm really excited to see what comes. Another question back there?
Well, you also said, so this was introduced in January of this year, but then you also stated that, like, something along the lines of it hasn't been incorporated into our local SLO County rules yet. What does that mean?
Yeah, so the question is process in this, how things trickle down or carry up. So the state has recognized a severe housing crisis, and it's now mandating some codes that all of the jurisdictions have to follow. So these are coming down, kind of interpretations on these mandates, kind of by the day of what they mean by all of this. And so think about it, the city of San Luis Obispo and every other jurisdiction has a code that codifies these rules, but they can't change that code every day. So maybe David comes to the council and changes their ADU code once a year. So because the state has just made a clarification recently, that may not catch up in the local code for another year, or some months yet.
So we may not get our proposals approved within this year until the code is changed?
I think that's a great question. It's one I can't answer, and David's noting it. So we want to leave plenty of time of questions, because I'm curious how he'll answer that too. So we'll hear from him as we go along in questions, whether at the end or during his presentation, then depending on how he's comfortable. So exciting times with these four, a bit confusing. As the state sort of figures out what they mean, then that has to translate, and the local jurisdictions have to figure out what they mean, the state means and what they mean, and all of these options can look like. So it's exciting times and confusing. Yeah, let's go on. Let's look at the next steps. So there are a couple types of ADUs, construction types, that are kind of handy to know and understand. One is factory-built ADUs, and these include manufactured homes, which are a one-track, a factory-built home, and prefab and panelized. So yeah, basically, nutshell, these are homes that are built somewhere else and shipped on site. And they are all allowed as ADUs. So there's some confusion about whether you could use a manufactured home as an ADU. Yes, you can. And so our other option then, site-built, or often called stick-built ADUs, they're constructed on your site. There's some middle ground of panelization and parts built, but that's roughly it. That clear to people? Okay, yep, next. So as far as definition here, well, since we had some questions, it's important and confusing. So these are what we're talking about are full residential dwelling units. We'll get to a table. They can be as small as 150 square feet, quite small, but they have to have space for a bathroom, sanitary facilities, and for cooking. So cooking and bathing. So these aren't just guest rooms that you can sleep in. We also need space for cooking, eating, and bathing. And so state law kind of, now, state law doesn't actually limit these, but they're generally defined as 1,200 square feet or less. Jurisdictions could be more liberal and let them be larger, but in my experience, most jurisdictions are limiting these to under 1,200 square feet. They want them to be smaller and not overtake the primary house. They are run by other names: carriage house, granny flat, mother-in-law, basement unit. So you could hear a lot of references to other terms. And ADUs don't have any owner occupancy requirement. So that's really important because some of these other forms, like a JADU, do. And so a junior accessory unit, a JADU, is defined several ways. The state of California created this definition, so if any other states or jurisdictions use it, I don't know of them. Have you heard of any other states using JADU definition? Anybody? I don't think so. So this is a state thing relevant to us. No more than 500 square feet. So it's on the smaller size. And it's contained completely within existing square footage. So that can be your house or an attached garage for a JADU, not new construction, and not a detached structure like an ADU could be in, not a JADU. Same thing, contains all cooking. There's some interpretation that has to be electric cooking, or initially the state code said, but I think they're backtracking on that a little. Do you know if you're applying all electric here?
I'm not sure, because I know all electric ordinances have been contested.
Right. And so I think they've dropped that. That was in the original legislation, but I think I saw a gas option in the newest handbook update. So forget the all electric, but it does make sense if you can. Yeah?
Is the caveat that it's the garage, or that it doesn't have its own kitchen and bathing facility.
It does, yeah, it does have its own kitchen. A JADU can share a bathroom with the rest of the residents. But at the end of the day, that's just a spare bedroom, and why go through the permit, if it shares a bathroom? So I don't think we're seeing much of that. If you're just gonna have a bedroom, why bother going through the permit process? Yeah, so not required to have a private bathroom. It is required to have a separate entry. And the big note, if you're going to go for a JADU, is right now the JADU has to, or the primary house has to be owner occupied. So if you're looking to rent out a house or move, your JADU has to have a deed restriction that would require you to be a resident occupant if you own the house. So that's a limit on the JADU. I'll show you a table of all these that helps put them side by side after a little more description. Yeah?
Say one or the other, primary or JADU has to be owner occupied?
No, an ADU, either of the ADUs don't have to have owner occupancy, just the JADU.
I mean, I said the primary residence.
Oh, got it, correct. You're correct. The owner could live in the smaller unit or the larger one. Yeah, either way.
The smaller junior to whoever.
That's right. We see a lot of cases with elder adult clients where they want the smaller unit and to rent out the larger house. So that's definitely a legal option there. Yeah. Okay, let's look at what else we've got. Few photos here of some JADU conversions of small studios, an example of a small kitchenette that you could pull out electric appliances, an induction burner, and with a small fridge make very usable with limited space. And so our other option, legal here in the city, are tiny houses on wheels, and unfortunately not allowed in most jurisdictions yet in this county, but we see them allowed in jurisdictions where well more than half of the state's population lives. So they are allowed in a lot of places, and we're really hoping HCD will come up with a way to allow them statewide. We put these in a category of movable dwellings, and they're really an amazing option because we can get these in. We'll look at the pro formas at the end, but we can buy beautiful homes such as this one for $60,000 to $120,000 and install them in a get lucky situation for under $5,000. So we can get these in at a way lower price point. It's also an exciting way to have home ownership for people that can't afford land. What we're seeing is a lot of women who are interested in owning their home, buying these and finding a place to park it and rent the land. And so it's a way, people can feather their nests and have the home ownership at a much lower rate. So these tiny houses on wheels are defined in multiple ways, and roughly they're on a chassis. They're on this metal frame with wheels, so they can be rolled around, movable part. Yeah.
I've always wondered, how do those get hooked up to like electricity and sanitation and stuff?
Yeah, they get hooked up with flex hoses. If you can all picture what you'd see a podium at an RV park, where you have your electrical and your water and then a wastewater hookup down at the ground. Very much like that you'd have flexible hoses that you'd plug into a similar podium type setup. Yeah, and so it can be very easy where those things are available. And then there's some print there that I can't read that's, again, self-contained. You need your sanitation facilities, cooking and restroom, and they can fit within these. This is Smart Chair's demo cottage, and at the end of the presentation, we'll flip through some slides of the interior of this thing. It's 176 square feet and contains a kitchenette area and bathroom and pretty fully equipped. I know a few of you have seen it. Will you just raise your hands how many have seen our demo cottage already? Okay, just a few. So we'll show some slides so people can get a better sense of just what a beautiful space you can have in 176 square feet even, and usable. They have to be towable, and these things can't move on their own power, so they can't be an RV that has an engine. That's kind of the difference here, part of the difference between a tiny house on wheels. And so they can be a minimum here in the city of 150 square feet. I see we left the 100 square feet, they can be in Arroyo Grande, that small, and up to 400 square feet, not including loft areas. And then they have to be licensed by the DMV. And in order to be legal here or in Arroyo Grande, they also have to have a safety certification from a third party. So one could get into trouble with some self-built homes that aren't certified. They could be wonderfully built and safe, but without that certification, the city wouldn't accept them because their building department isn't doing inspections, and it's really hard to tell what's going on in enclosed walls. So they rely on that third-party inspection to have been done. And home builders, DIYers, can get that inspection. We have a couple DIYers in the county who have built their own and paid roughly $2,500 to go through an inspection process as they build. So it is possible then to still keep that in your hands and do it and get that safety inspection. Yeah. And so this comparison table may be helpful to people comparing these three types of residents allowed in the city. And so we've got our ADU column, junior ADU, and our tiny house on wheels. And so basically minimum to maximum square feet, the ADU could be roughly 150 to 12, JADU 150 to 5, and the tiny house on wheels in SLO 150 to 4. So you can see there are some variations in maximum size there, minimum all the same. They all have to have kitchens. The JADU can share a bathroom. Again, why permit it if it doesn't have a bathroom? Access, an ADU could somehow share access, but you generally want it to have its own separate access, really. And then parking kind of depends on the different things. The JADU and the THO don't require off-street parking here in the city. And for an ADU, it really depends on distance to transit.
That's no parking.
No parking required in SLO? Okay, good. No parking, off-street parking required in SLO for ADUs. So that's great. That really helps because for anybody trying to make a project work, trying to drum up parking spaces on small lots is a tricky one. And then again, owner occupancy, it is required an owner to live in one of the units for a JADU and THO. And then all of them, important to point out, the last column I haven't talked about, but part of these state laws and mandates are, all of these things are a ministerial approval. That means there's no discretion. So if you meet the requirements and you submit a permit, you can get to go. Anybody who's done development otherwise through the discretionary process knows you can get held up, and you may spend a lot of time and money on a permit and never get to go. So it's huge that if you meet these objective requirements, you can get a project in. And that really helps with minimizing risk and adding to certainty. And so this slide shows our viewpoint of our local world at SmartShare, our kind of options continuum, and what we can do to provide affordable housing. So starting on the bottom left, we can provide home sharing, sometimes with no renovations, at just a matching cost of a few $1,000s to do background screening and such. We could provide junior ADUs, sometimes in a get lucky scenario, for very little. Again, within existing space. The movable tiny houses on wheels. We've had a couple of Arroyo Grande clients who've bought their tiny houses on wheels for around $60,000, and they've had flat lots. They could just wheel them in with existing utility infrastructure. So they've been able to put in tiny houses on wheels for under $90,000 and rent them out a month later for over $2,000 a month. Payback period, roughly 4 years. So we'll talk more about the numbers there, but there's a huge potential in this movable tiny house, but some challenges, and we're not seeing as much uptick as we'd like with those. Garage conversions, if you've got an existing garage, you can convert it. Attached could be a JADU or an ADU. Could, in a get lucky scenario with a pretty good bones garage, could be done a get lucky for 75, relatively low cost amongst these. And then a little higher cost for the new detached ADUs and higher cost for other missing middle stuff. So getting started, let me stop for a minute, take a survey. So okay, question first, please.
I had a question about the
Sure.
tiny house on wheels.
Sure.
In the past, I thought it was a requirement that they had to be hooked up to electrical, sewer, water. Is that still a requirement, or can they be standalone units?
The code says to the planning director's comfort level or something like that. So yes and no. I don't know where the planning director would weigh in on alternatives. We've wanted to run some buyer, but we haven't yet. So there has to be some kind of adequate provision for water, our three kind of utilities here, water, wastewater, and electrical. And so we think there could be some options for dry toilets and off-grid electrical with solar battery backup, but we haven't tested it yet. So if there's someone interested in working with us on that or has some ideas, we'd really like to. But maybe David can confirm, anybody come in that you know of for a THO permit with creative utilities? Not yet. Okay, so being the first could take a lot of work, but we do see some options there. Yeah. So who's here? Anybody got an ADU already on your property? Anybody live in one right now? So homeowners thinking about building one then? Or maybe just check it out? Okay, just to see, anybody in the development community here who's a designer or builder? So we know? Okay, all homeowners. Real estate? Okay, great. Well, it's helpful to know, and as far as tracking these, and when we're talking about equity and what people can sell their houses for if they've invested money in ADUs, it could be helpful, your experience there. So let's then talk about getting started. First of all, if I'm going out and talking to clients about doing this, I want them to think about, and I want to understand why they want to build an ADU. So who of you who are thinking about it, what's your primary purpose? If people share that, just a couple people.
For us, it's to share it with our kids who are our kids. They're retiring next year. They've been out of the country for 25 years teaching international. And so they want to, and we're moving from Napomo, hopefully, to San Luis. So we're trying to make it come together where we have an ADU that they can live in and eventually live in the primary house.
In the main house. Okay, so we'd put that in the family flexibility, kind of family compound, family flexibility. Other reasons?
I have a disabled daughter, and so I want to build a unit that I can have some community, maybe have somebody move in and share, taking care of her for rent, and kind of build more of a family, because we don't have a lot of family around here. Okay. Other reasons people are thinking of priorities?
Well, I would say to increase the value plus maybe a revenue stream.
Okay. Well, it's helpful to know because all of these are typical, I'll say typical kind of reasons. And so when you're thinking about your ADU, it's really important for you to be clear on your reasons because they may be very different than somebody else's and we don't want to make assumptions. So what you're trying to do with yours, really then reflects kind of what directions you go. I know some people are looking for design projects and to express their creativity. So they may not want to go with a prefab factory designed ADU. You know, they may want to design it themselves. Other people may want to be more efficient and just get something in. So that's important. And then as you think about your goals and needs, really getting inspired about what's out there and doable. I don't know, do people get ADUs and tiny houses in their feeds or Dwell magazine in their feeds like I do? Okay, I don't know what Real World is. But, you know, I get lots of these, and there are a lot of really great designs out there. So we can give you some places to look for good ideas so you can see what options are. And we can set a date to show our demo cottage again, because it really helps. People are amazed, like I said, how much can fit into under 200 square feet that they can't imagine. So sometimes seeing that in photos or firsthand can really help to get some inspiration about what's possible. And then step 3 is talking to a professional or professionals to understand what can be done and price points, to understand more clearly the codes applicable to your residence and your spot. And then coming up with a budget and financing strategy. There's wanting to do it and being able to come up with the bucks to do it. And then deciding on type of construction and hiring a team. So we'll go through more details on all of these. But otherwise, kind of starting on design and type, it's important to think about whether you may want to put in a tiny house on wheels, a JADU or an ADU. And we set up this presentation in Arroyo Grande that was utilizing a bunch of pre-reviewed plans. So this is one of them, and I see I didn't click that out of the slide I meant to, because the City of SLO hasn't opted into that program. So the City of SLO doesn't yet have any pre-designed plans approved. And so that's something, there will be some, because a newish state law mandates that any ADU that's been improved in SLO in this code cycle is automatically approved for your project. So there are some neat new opportunities as these state laws kick in. And so we'll talk more about that.
Is that for the whole county or just San Luis Obispo?
It's jurisdiction by jurisdiction. So unfortunately, the pre-approved plans in Arroyo Grande, Morro Bay, Atascadero, and one other jurisdiction, Grover, aren't pre-approved in the City of San Luis Obispo. You could use them, you could get them and use them for free, but the City of San Luis Obispo would still need to approve them the first time. So we can talk more about that if people are interested. That's a way to save design fees, and we'll look at prices, but that could save several $1,000s in design fees, having those ready to go, and make them quicker for the jurisdiction to approve. And then look at costs and funds available, just as far as reality checks getting going, time frame for project. It's also important to mention, David will go through it again, but for smaller ADUs, under 750 square feet, state law exempts them from fees, infrastructure fees. So you wouldn't have to pay added water fees or park fees or any of those fees that can end up costing tens of thousands of dollars on a primary home. So that's a big deal. And do you have space to install a prefab or roll in a tiny house on wheels? That's a big deal. If you have space for that, those can be options. If you don't, you may have to crane them over a house, and it's not necessarily a deal breaker, but it could add $3,000 to $5,000 or so to your project. And again, are you looking for an economical project for affordable housing, or a high design project for a fun project because you can? These are very different projects in the end, maybe. And then maintaining privacy is a big one I like to bring up front when people are still in the kind of general thought place. If you have this in your side yard or backyard, and it's not someone you know and love and want to be exposed to 24/7, it's really important to think about how the layout of your yard could be set up to keep and maintain privacy. Because that's a big one. So whether that's with fencing or shrubbery or what kind of screening, and thinking through your pathways and seating areas. So we can talk more about that if people would like. Yeah?
Is there any requirement that the ADU design has to match that of the primary residence?
In general, no. We've learned this kind of mimicry with historical structures or whatever doesn't actually go over so well and can be a real problem and bomb out. That said, there can be some requirements for some in historical districts. So within historic districts, there can be some objective requirements for something matching, not mimicking, which is really can be awful. So there's a little bit of an allowance there, but in general and outside of historic districts, the aesthetic doesn't have to match. Yeah. David's here. Welcome.
Thanks, Ann. Hi, everybody. I'm Dave Amini. I'm the city's housing coordinator. ADUs are a really critical part of our city's housing continuum. We have a long history, really, of ADUs in our city before it was even kind of a political term. Going all the way back to carriage houses behind some of our older homes from the early 1900s. Some of our neighborhoods. Some of our neighborhoods, like Duval Ranch or other neighborhoods in SLO, actually have ADUs included as a part of their design. So, and in 2024 alone, the city issued 88 building permits for ADUs. So we've been seeing a pretty consistent amount of ADUs adding to our housing stock. So I'll just be kind of reviewing the city's approach to ADUs. Our perspective is, the city is a pro-housing city. We see that this is an important way to add density and housing to our neighborhoods. So with that being said, the main mandate is coming down from state law, which changes at least once a year, if not multiple times a year. And the city ordinance process has to catch up with that. And we recently underwent a overhaul of the city's ADU ordinance in order to match up with state law requirements, and currently that's being reviewed by the state to ensure compliance. And so if the state determines that anything that we have there doesn't match up, then we'll have to go back to the drawing board and redo that. But really the goal is to incorporate all those state requirements and in some cases even go outside of that. So the city's ADU ordinance is located in the municipal code, section 17.86. That includes ADUs, JADUs, and tiny homes. ADUs and JADUs are kept separate. ADUs are now allowed in all zones. Previously, there were only certain zones that were allowed, but any lot that has an existing or proposed residential structure, and JADUs are only allowed on a lot with a single family home. And JADUs have a maximum size of 500 square feet, and they are either part of a single family residence or directly attached. ADUs can be up to 850 square feet for a studio or one bedroom layout, 1,000 square feet for a two bedroom, and we allow up to 1,200 square feet. But that requires director's action, which requires a higher level of review than just a standard ADU application. It's important to note too that ADU proposals must comply with the development standards of the underlying zone. So heights and setbacks, we have a 25-foot height requirement. That's kind of the maximum height that you could do for an ADU. Setbacks are anywhere from, typically 4 feet from all sides, front, and rear of the property. So that's what we look for when we're evaluating these applications. And a popular question that I really get from most people is, okay, how many ADUs can I build? I have a single family lot. And so the answer is right here, and this is kind of a pass down of state law. So we have one detached ADU that's detached from the single family residence. You can go up to 1,000 square feet for a two bedroom. And like I said, 1,200 with the director's action. One attached junior ADU or JADU up to 500 square feet. And like Ann mentioned, there's an owner occupancy requirement by state law. So you would either have to occupy the primary residence or the JADU. And also important to note, there's no short-term rentals allowed for JADUs or ADUs. And then the next ADU involves a conversion of an existing structure or proposed additional space. The most common case that we see is conversion of like a garage, whether that's like a detached garage structure or something that's attached. And if you have this kind of detached garage or other structure, no more than 150 square feet of addition is allowed to create that ADU. And then, like I mentioned, all our development standards must still be followed in a proposal that we would evaluate. And then this is kind of a new portion of state law for this year. For multifamily lots, you can have up to 8 ADUs detached from the main multifamily dwelling. It's important to note that it must be an existing multifamily dwelling, and the number of ADUs allowable is equal to the amount of existing units. So if you have a fourplex apartment building, say you have a large parking lot, you could build a building containing 4 ADU units on that parking lot, but you couldn't build 8, you could only build 4. And in this scenario, the ADUs can be attached together in one structure, but they must be detached from the main structure. And then another portion that was kind of added this year is that you can convert existing space in multifamily dwellings to an ADU up to 25% of the amount of existing units. So if you have a fourplex and say you have like a rec room or garage or carport or some kind of space that's there, you could convert that into one ADU. And then if you have a blank lot, which doesn't really exist in the city anymore, and you're proposing a multifamily dwelling, you could have up to 2 ADU units on that lot added to your plans. So the important thing to note with ADUs, typically the reasons why we see a lot of developers and people pursue this as a way to add density is that there's limited fees that the city can charge. So the city can still charge plan review fees, but the impact fees that are typically associated with multifamily or single family development, which can get pretty high and cost prohibitive, we're not allowed to apply that by state law. And so the city currently doesn't charge impact fees towards any ADUs. This is regardless of the size requirement, at least currently. State law has it for less than 750 square feet. Important to note, there's no fees for utility connections unless you're proposing a new connection. We typically require a new water meter for ADUs that are greater than 750 square feet, so that may be a consideration to take into account. And then the city has several areas that are considered capacity constrained, whereby the city's sewer infrastructure cannot handle the amount of throughput, particularly during high rain events. And so in these areas, we've implemented a wastewater offset program, whereby if you are constructing an ADU or a certain development in one of these areas, you must cover the replacement of someone else's lateral. That's run by our utilities department. We have a website that kind of explains this program in greater detail. So I've just posted links and an email there. Fire sprinkler requirement. If a primary home has sprinklers, then fire sprinklers are required in the ADU, but the ADU construction itself doesn't trigger the requirement for fire sprinklers. With that said, the city is currently under the impact of new fire hazard severity zones. So these are basically zones that the state passes down that have, a higher risk of wildfire. And the last time this map was updated in 2011, the city had 11 properties in the very high fire hazard severity zone. That's increased to over 2,000 properties that are in some kind of fire hazard severity zones. And this is an important detail because there are different building code requirements that would apply. And that's found in California Building Code 7A. The code for these areas requires building materials that are ignition resistant. Typically what we see the largest additional cost in these zones is tempered glass windows, but you might also see, a class 1 roof, some kind of non-combustible shingle or metal, different building materials, different roof vent construction. All these are best practices that are required to be implemented in these fire hazard zones, and this is as a result of all the wildfires that we've been seeing, having to implement that. Yeah, question.
That last part about fire only apply to detached ADUs, or does it also apply to attached and converted?
It would apply to any kind of new construction. So if you are converting an attached portion of the structure, that would apply. But if it's something that's entirely within the structure, then you wouldn't necessarily have to change the materials of your primary home. But that would kind of be evaluated on a per project basis. Yes, just want to follow up. Ann was talking about pre-approved ADU plans. So per state law, the city is required to accept plan submissions for pre-approved ADUs. We haven't gotten anything submitted yet. So if there's any architects that you know that are wanting to get their plans pre-approved by the city, we have a contact right here. Eventually it will be a portal on our website, and the plans will be reviewed for building code conformance only. So you might be able to use a pre-approved plan, but you would still have to have an architect and civil engineer prepare a site plan, grading plan, and civil plan. And we would also want to review to make sure all the setbacks and certain safety standards are complied with. And I think it's important to note too that architectural plans, besides certain pre-approved plans, are property of the architect. So you would still need to reach out to the architect of record and make sure that you could go through and use those plans. If we get consent from the architect, the city will post any pre-approved plans on the website. Haven't seen a lot of interest. I think architects, are somewhat protective of their intellectual property, but I think it's just important to note, work with an architect, and if that's something anyone's interested in, we have the contact information here. And then a great reference that I point people to a lot is the ADU handbook. This is prepared by the state and kind of is a summary of answering these popular questions like, what can I build on a certain lot? A city's saying this, what's the state law requirement? Really say, we as a pro-housing city always want to be kind of ahead of what the state is requiring, but sometimes there can be conflicts, and so ADU handbook is a great resource. And I always encourage anyone to reach out to the planning department with any questions. You can come visit us at our counter next door, or send an email to planning@slocity.org. And I brought a few cards if anyone wants my email to contact.
Just answer the question we had in the back corner.
Yeah.
Which I forgot. What was your question we were going to ask him?
This was a rule as of January 2025, but it hasn't been incorporated in the San Luis Obispo County or city rules. And so the question was, do they apply today, or would the city reject any proposals within these guidelines?
No, so the city, if you bring a plan and you provide state law backing that, the state law says that I'm allowed to do this, the city would be required, by state law to review the plans according to that. The city's ADU ordinance has been updated and is in effect, and we believe that it's compliant with the state law and actually goes ahead of it in many different ways. So no, there's not necessarily a lag between waiting for the city to implement their local ordinance versus state law. State law ultimately is kind of what guides the cities in implementing their ordinances.
The same rule would apply to any other city in San Luis Obispo County? In California.
Yeah, jurisdiction by jurisdiction, state law applies uniformly, so that would be what they would have to follow. It just kind of depends. Some jurisdictions take a more pro-housing approach, some take a more conservative approach, and so it's really, about doing the research. That's why the ADU handbook is a great resource that I point people to, because it has a lot of these clear requirements that you could then take and, use if you feel like you need to go down that route.
So according to the state then, are there any stipulations against adding an ADU, any type of ADU, if the property is on like a well or septic,
I don't think that there's any of those requirements in state law. I would just look into the ADU handbook or reaching out to Department of Housing and Community Development. They also can give guidance on state law and how it may apply to a specific situation like that.
So cost and financing really matters here. So some people are going to be familiar with this, so sorry. Other people, this is going to be new and important. There are two parts really of your cost of doing these things. One is your pre-development cost. That's your kind of uncertain cost. to put in, get designs together and plans and permits before you can start building. And you have to do this stuff before you can even get a quote for the cost of your project from a builder. And so this is pre-development stuff is your risk component, because you can get to go on these, but you could get your permit and then you could bring in some builders and you could get sticker shock like so many aspiring ADU builders do. You could find that what you thought might be a $250,000 project, you're getting bids at $400,000. So that's where you kind of need all of this stuff together before you can get bids. And so we're going to talk a little bit about both of those. So in pre-development, you might have kind of $5,000. These are all rough numbers and would vary on every site, but your kind of due diligence. For example, you know you need a wastewater line, but you don't know where your wastewater line is. So you may have to bring in a plumber with a scope who needs to figure out where the heck your line is and whether it's adequate, what's there. You could have design fees. Your permitting could be a few $1,000s. Do you know, David, how much an average ADU permit's running in SLO?
I'd have to look that up.
Okay, in AG, where we got exact numbers, we were looking at around $2,000 to $4,000 for an ADU permit. Sound probably about right? It'd be my guess, $2,000 to $5,000 for an ADU permit. A tiny house on wheels permit started at $869 when the ordinance was passed a couple years ago. It may have gone up a little bit since then, and I don't know it. But you're somewhere in for $1,000 to $5,000 in permitting fees. And so those can add up. So it's important to think about a range and make sure you've got, enough cash once you're starting, or funds committed to a project. And then your construction costs are really going to vary depending on your design style and finishes. If you're like me and you're happy with a Home Depot finish, it's going to cost a lot less than some designer options. Your square footage, right now we're seeing 250 is probably low, 250 a square foot. I don't know. I would guess now 400 a square foot. Is that what you'd tell people? Anybody out there a builder? Because your ADUs are smaller, they've got more expensive wet space, kitchens and bathrooms. So they tend to run a lot higher per square foot than you may hear for larger houses that are more dry space, that are less expensive to build. So it's another one where tends to be a lot of sticker shock as far as price per square foot and how that translates out. But if we were saying $400 a square foot for 1,000 square foot ADU, we'd be at $400,000 construction cost today. So that's the range we see there. Yeah. And then your infrastructure, don't discount it, because if your power box is outdated on a a way back home like any of mine, it's not going to be adequate to carry the extra juice. So you may need an electrician to bring more power to the box and a new sub panel. And sewer upgrades, David mentioned. How much of the city is under upgrade zone? Any guess?
20%, 30%.
20, 30. So what are your odds if you're going to roll the dice? You're, 1 out of 5 there, whether you're going to have to pay sewer upgrades. And that might be a new line, might hit you for another death by 15 grand. So you've got to be ready for these things going into a project. Unfortunately, what we've seen is a lot of lower income homeowners on the edge are priced out because they just can't take that risk of all of the unknowns. And it kills us, but we don't know what to do about it. So financing these things, how do you do it? We're seeing 2 primary ways. The huge number of Californians that are doing this are doing it with cash in hand and bro money, and with home equity lines of credit, HELOCs. So if you've had your house for a while and you have some equity, you can pull some of that out. And so those are the really primary ways we're seeing people pull this off. And then there are other ways of doing it: a second mortgage, cash out refinance, a renovation or construction loan, but those tend to be quite a bit more expensive. And the state has offered some funding for the pre-development through CalHFA loans, but those were all snapped up pretty fast. After a slow uptake of the first offering, they found a way to get it to homeowners, and the second offering was snapped up in some number of hours. And so we're hoping there may be some more of those loans, but we don't know.
Do those become available, and how is one to get notified about them?
Yeah, the state has offered 2 rounds of those so far over the last 3 years. And so the last round was roughly a year and a half ago, snapped up real fast.
We're about due then.
We can hope, but given the budget deficit, and I wouldn't hold your breath for it. I'm gonna vote unlikely any day soon. No crystal ball there. So let's just look quickly at a pro forma. This is very rough, and this is really get lucky, best case scenario in all 3 cases on costs of these things. So I just wanted to quickly, we can go through questions if you'd like. And again, this is get lucky, not necessarily get real. But in our best case scenarios, a few things. So first column there is ADU with loan, then is a tiny house on wheels, and then is ADU without loan. Big difference, you know, if you gotta get a loan. So I just put in our get lucky amount as $150,000 for an ADU and $85,000 for a tiny house on wheels. Your ADU is really likely to cost you more in the range of upwards of $250. So this is a really get lucky. We've seen a few, but not many. So that is your price. You've got then some site costs and infrastructure like we talked about, and permit and fees. So what kind of the thing goes up a bit. Though, as I told you, we've actually seen a few cases where we could do it for less than this 100 grand. As I said, a couple of our clients have managed it right in the 80 to 90,000 range total. And so we're assuming no down payment here. In the case where loans have to be taken, I just assumed full loans, no down. And then on the amortization period, I ran 2 schedules. For the ADU with the loan, I ran 20 years at 7%. On your 185 comes out to a monthly payment of $1,400. On the tiny house on wheel loan, at the time it wasn't possible to get longer term loans on tiny houses on wheels. 10 years was the maximum loan period you can get. Now there are some extended loans on those. But so you'll note then that's a slightly higher interest rate, which is now in a higher interest rate, a reality from when I made the slides a while ago. The tiny houses on wheels are considered chattel, personal property, so they run with a little higher interest rate on loans if you've got to borrow money. But so that 10-year payment came out to $1,200 a month. And so it's helpful to see what that looks like, because as we flip to the next slide, cash flow, that gives us a sense of our reality. Can he make money on it? And the jury's out. If we have it, this slide was from my perspective as an affordable houser. So here we have on the sort of cash flow, I want this housing to be affordable to a low income person. And right now that maximum is $1,400 a month, roughly. So I put that as my target rent as an affordable houser to house clients of mine. You've got that rent in, and then you've got a bunch of expenses, property taxes, utilities and insurance, and then your loan payment if you need to borrow funds. So what you see in the cash flow, the middle green line is you're really at kind of a negative cash flow on the ADU with the loan. You can eke out a positive cash flow on the tiny house on wheels, and certainly then the ADU without a loan, you're all cash flow. You don't have a lot of expenses there. So it's hard to make your money back with a very low income affordable rent. This isn't representative, because what we're seeing, your average rent we're seeing for either a THO or an ADU in the city, anybody know what we're seeing? What are we seeing? Rent for a backyard studio. We're seeing upwards of $2,000. Somebody's got a tiny house on wheels in Garden Street. He told me it was just getting a renter contracted for $2,150 for a tiny house on wheels, very much the same model as our demo cottage. So the market rents are much higher. So for somebody who wanted to put one of these in and make some cash flow, but wasn't tied to a low income affordable rate, these numbers would be different. So I ran this at what I wanted to see, and it is and isn't. So that's something we can talk about more if people want. I want to just briefly mention the construction process and choosing the right contractor, because often homeowners interested in doing this haven't built stuff before. And so it's daunting. And so it's really important to look carefully and choose the right builder or general contractor for your project. Do they do designs and build a whole package and permitting? Or do they just build? That's one of the questions you'll want to know. Maybe you're a planner yourself or a designer and you can do some of that and save some money. Maybe you can't. So you'll want to ask about design, permitting, and building. You'll want to see what other ADUs they've built, maybe some pictures and some references, and whether those are high-end designer ADUs or less expensive ones. And then, have they constructed any in your jurisdiction? If they're going to do your permitting, it can be helpful to know they have a relationship with David and the others in the planning office, so they know up from down and can get stuff done. And then, how many projects will they work on at once? Some contractors do the whole job themselves and they stay on a site. And so that can be the kind of person you may want to have a one-on-one relationship with someone. Other contractors work a lot of jobs at once and they bring in subs. So you may contract with a guy and then not see him again because they'll be basically running subs through your job site. And that can be efficient and get stuff done and done well. But if that's a hard one for you, it's important to kind of think about whether that can work for your lifestyle and comfort level then. And then you'll want to make sure they're licensed and have insurance. There is a state licensing board you can check with, and so you want to make sure they're bonded and insured. So if you have any problems, you have some recourse there with the state. And then the last thing to think about in general is time schedules. If you wanted your ADU yesterday and your contractor you love has jobs for the next 8 months, it may seem like the right fit, but not quite be. That time schedule really matters, kind of how many projects they have in queue or where you're at in your process. So thinking about that really matters. Yeah. And then last, we've just got renting out and management. As mentioned, again, really important, no short-term rentals, less than 30 days. We're trying to create housing here, not more tourist-serving options. It's important to look at maintaining and managing your ADU. That is some work. And so whether you want to think about hiring a property manager or those may be things you're comfortable doing on your own, they're jobs. And so important to think about maintenance of the house, keeping up insurance and property taxes. And it's important to note, it always comes up, property taxes will be assessed only for the new ADU. So if you're like me and you've owned your home for quite a while and you're enjoying the real benefits of Prop 13 and your low basis, you will not have any stepped up property insurance with Prop 13 issues. You'll just have an added tax on the value of your new ADU. So if you spent 200 grand on it, roughly 1% or 2%. What's Prop 13 allow? 1 or 2? 1?
I figure 1.1.
1.1? Okay, so roughly 1%, 2 grand a month for property tax on a lower end ADU. Tiny houses on wheels have no property tax. They're not real property. So that's a benefit there. Yeah. And then what else? Management, the right tenants, thinking about property management firm. If that's the way you want to go and you may not be comfortable managing tenants, you just need to be cognizant a lot of property managers charge 3 to 8% of fees to manage tenants. So that's an important consideration in your cash flow. Yeah.
So do you have a list of developers that have done design that the construction groups that have done ADUs? Do you have resources for that?
We do. We have made contact with several builders in the county, and so we haven't verified them, vetted them. We have no financial interest, but we know it's kind of hard to connect with people who want small jobs, because a lot of builders don't want small ADUs. Some builders just want garage conversions. Some would just want detached. So it can be helpful to have a little ferreting out there. So if you're interested, we can collect your names and share some resources with you. Also on lenders who do this, and some other resources there if people are interested. Yeah, and so again, our website, smartsharehousingsolutions.org, it's a mouthful. We have a lot of resources on our ADU Slow tab there that can be helpful, and the city tab, and our info is a way to reach us easily, or I'm Ann with an E at all of that, smartsharehousingsolutions.org.
For more information on accessory dwelling units and tiny homes on wheels, visit our website, smartsharehousingsolutions.org, or email us at info@smartsharehousingsolutions.org. Thanks for watching.